Hello and welcome to Chats, a television podcast, Season 7, PrisonerChatz. My name is Magellan, and they are a born survivor. I am a born killer. We were made for each other. It's Alan.
Hey.
Turns out that Chats has been a game of cat and mouse this whole time, and this is the one where I'm finally going to get you.
You're the Tom to my Jerry. You're the Wile E. Coyote to my woodpecker.
Let's call the whole thing off.
Ba-da-bow.
What's the song I was actually thinking of? We go together.
Let's call the whole thing off. That's the vibe.
Yeah.
Well, hello. And hello, Magellan. And hello to the listener. And hello to you.
Who's the you? You covered everybody.
Like
you talking to Patty McGee?
Yeah.
Up in heaven?
Yeah, my constituents.
Uh-huh. You're his representative here on Earth.
Absolutely. His daughter, she's doing her best. Good for her. But me, I'm the real Patty McGee.
Yeah, he speaks to you at night. He whispers in your ear.
What gives us the right to call these showrunners by like cute nicknames? We don't know them. We're not friends with them. He's dead.
What's he gonna do? What's he gonna say?
He's gonna hit us.
It's affectionate. I think if my name was Patrick McGowan and somebody called me Patty McGee, I would like it. I would think it was cute.
He's gonna run into us with his ice station zebra if we keep talking sass about him. Talking milky sass.
Well, everybody, this is a show where we watch The Prisoner 2 episodes a week. And this week we watched episodes 15 and 16 of The Prisoner. First, we watched The Girl Who Was Death. It was written by Terrence Feely, directed by David Tomblin. It originally aired on January 18th, 1968. And Alan, what took place in The Girl Who Was Death?
You know, I'm really glad you asked that because I want to tell you. In this episode, number 6 avoids the assassination attempts of a beautiful woman while foiling the plots of her megalomaniac father. Haha. He's megalomaniacal, though, for sure.
Yeah.
That word has too many syllables for what it means.
Yeah, it's almost as if someone who was a megalomaniac created it
to
have an appropriately ostentatious adjective for themselves.
Precisely. Yeah. And this is an ostentatious episode if I ever saw one. It's really fascinating to me that where we are at with The Prisoner because, you know, we've watched spy episodes, we've watched one-off weird funny episodes, we've seen scenes that had nothing to do with anything. And while this episode, I think, did feel really cohesive and it's the sum of its parts, it's still just so strange that they made this decision. And it kind of puts into question, like, what standards were in 1967 with, like, what do we do in the, like, back end of our season? Like, we still have this episode order and we have to produce something, so... Hey, Dave, you got any unused scripts? And Dave's like, yeah, we have old Danger Man scripts.
Yeah. When I read that, so if people don't know, The Girl Who Was Death is essentially this vignette where Patty McGee's character, number 6, is back in London for some reason, and he's being chased around and almost killed by this woman who calls herself Death. And she's like dressed in all white and she has tipped eyebrows and it's a whole thing. And she's sort of like seductive, but also trying to kill him kind of thing. Anyway, and it's got nothing to do with The Prisoner except for the very end where he closes the storybook and he's reading it to a bunch of kids. And he's like, and that's the story of how I saved London from a crazy lady.
How I met your mother.
Children.
Right.
And yeah, when I read that trivia, that it was just a script, it was a two-parter that they had sitting around from Danger Man, from Patty McGee's old show, and they just used it here. I had the same reaction of, why? Why are you doing that?
I truly think it's a case where they had to fill episodes because it sounds like The Prisoner was a show with like a singular thesis and idea that then had to fit into 17 eps, and they just kind of threw scripts at the wall, which I think is fun. It's like, you know, this episode's really creative and extremely fast and goes a lot of places. I think there's like probably 20 or so scene changes within these 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And it does tie back into the show at the end, but like, again, when you're trying to, especially like as a TV podcast, trying to find what is the thesis of the show, what is the show about, and you get an episode that just throws something in the face of that, like, and this one is in a storybook, it's weird and fictional, too bad. It just makes our job a little bit trickier, but I respect it for that. And again, I think for what it's trying to do as this sort of light send up of spy fiction and like spy movies, specifically like James Bond, it succeeds. It does what it's trying to do. It's just weird that it's in this show that we've otherwise thought of as like very singular in a different way.
Yeah, I definitely was more entertained by this episode than I was by the last two, which were also strange departures from what The Prisoner is. I definitely liked it a lot more than Living in Harmony, for example. But yeah, it didn't feel like The Prisoner, because it is this light, tongue-in-cheek thing. And we've talked a lot about how The Prisoner is a funny show.
Yeah.
And does have subversive qualities and does have times where it's doing social satire, but it's never really done parody. And The Girl Who Was Death is straight up a parody episode. It just doesn't jive with the rest of the show to me. And so the whole time I was watching it, it was like, okay, this is fun. And I would watch this show where the thing is that Patty McGee is constantly chased around by a beautiful woman who's trying to kill him. I would watch that show.
And like mad scientists who are trying to blow up London. Yeah,
I would have fun if this is kind of like, the Patrick McGoohan James Bond movie that we never got.
Yeah, yep.
In a way. And in that context, it's fun, and it would be fun to have like seen this and be like, whoa, have you ever seen the original James Bond where they only did one movie? It's called The Girl Who Was Death, and he's my favorite James Bond.
Yeah, one person is like obnoxiously obsessed with this one and is like, this is the only good. Yeah. This is the real James Bond. It's based on the books.
Right. This one, that context is fun to me, but again, I'm coming to The Prisoner to have this like allegorical literary experience, and this episode doesn't serve that in any way.
And pretty early on, I would say that it's parody because we're like playing cricket. I guess we're just in a cricket game, and we kind of get like a cold open where the man who's like throwing the cricket ball, he throws it a little far, and then tries to grab it from some bushes, and it's replaced with an explosive one. And when he throws it, it blows up in the guy's face, and he dies. And you're like, oh my God, there's like a murder plot. And now Six is getting a disguise, and he's walking down the street, and there's a guy like shining some shoes, except the guy's actually a spy man, and the brush that he's using to shine the shoes is a telephone. And he's like, your mission is to put on the disguise and find out who killed the guy. And it's like, what? I am literally watching like Q assign James Bond his task, and he has a femme fatale, and he's gonna have all of his gadgets and crap like that.
He has really like a whole bit where he's dressed up like Sherlock Holmes and goes boxing, and
the amount of disguise changes in this episode is good. It's very sad. It's very rewarding to watch. We talk about how much we love Patty McGee's like facial hair evolution, and for him to go full old school Sherlock Holmes mutton chops is very, very rewarding.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. He goes into the record store towards the beginning to get his assignment, and is listening to the record, but like talking to it also.
Right.
First of all, the song that's being played in the music shop is incredible. It's like this, I don't know, it's like this slapping jazzy rock and roll kind of, it was really good. Way out of the normal zone of Prisoner music, but it was just 60s as hell and groovy, and I loved it. But when he's talking to the record's like, you're going to wear this standard disguise. And then, yeah, it like smash cuts to him in his mutton chops playing cricket. It's like, this is the standard disguise.
Right.
I
That's
love
just
it.
that. That's like, I'm here doing business. That's my business
Yeah,
disguise.
I always, on every mission I go on, I slap on these glue-on mutton chops and
Except,
put on my white sweater.
and that's ideal cricket attire, really, because he goes back to the game and now he's in the cricket game. Do you know anything about cricket? It's kind of a weird game.
No, I know there are wickets.
That's basically, and they can be sticky.
Yeah, and you don't want that.
No, I don't think you want that. At least if you're on that team.
And someone bowls. That's how
Yep.
you pitch, is you bowl.
Correct. It's basically like a different rule set of baseball. Like
Right.
there is still, and like a different tool set. But it's a lot slower, which is bananas when people think about like the biggest complaint with baseball is that it's too slow. Cricket
Yeah.
is like much slower, but the idea is that it's like your whole afternoon. Like people in India or people in the UK play cricket, and it's just like, oh, the tournament lasts days because every game is too long. I think cricket's a lot of fun, and it's another weird, like, this show really likes to start its episodes centered around games. Between this and Checkmate, I feel like we're getting a lot of like people just play things. People like, what do you do with your time when you're on
Yeah,
the village?
there's something about this sort of skewering of like privileged leisure activities.
Yeah, we just assassinate each other and play cricket and do chess all the time.
Yeah. I was on Twitter and I saw a clip of a baseball. It was like somebody tweeted like, this play from the 1993 season took the Phillies. I don't know if they're baseball or not, but it's like from like, maybe they'll be good to like, this will be the best season ever. And it was a clip of a guy getting a grand slam,
Oh,
which is cool,
yeah.
but it was really boring. It's just like, yeah, he hit it real far.
Yeah,
That's it.
the context of that matters a lot more, but also the like strategy of setting up a grand slam takes a ton of work, and that's more what's like impressive. But yeah, just watching it, you're like, okay, they hit the ball really hard. Cool.
Yeah, it went far. That's
It went
cool.
so far.
And I don't know. I'm not a sports guy, but as far as sports go, I like when baseball is on.
Yeah. Baseball's a good.
But
It can be a good spectator sport if you have the right crowd. I think. I'm more of a basketball and soccer viewer. I can appreciate those a lot more. Just like getting into the nitty gritty of like what's this person doing well.
right.
I remember like speaking of really slow sports, back in it was like 6 years ago or something. I got really into Formula One racing one summer, and I like
I remember that.
I got up early on Sundays to go on like NBC Sports and watch the F1 races. And I was like listening to a podcast about it and everything. And I was like, it was fun. It's nice to like have a little sport that you don't know anyone that watches it. But I think since then, F1 has like expanded, and like the people who are going to get into it are into it. It's not like, at least in the States, it's not like expanding that much more. But that like slow, methodical, really rewarding in the micro and in the macro, like sport of racing, I think is a lot of fun. Did you know, while we're talking about sports, that
What's that?
not NASCAR, but IndyCar, which is similar, sort of like an independent NASCAR, they're doing like virtual tournaments right now? Like they're doing their usual season, but they're doing it through like the NASCAR video game on PC. So all of the racers, like some of them dress up, some of them don't, and they all have like racing chairs and steering wheels with like force feedback, and it's like filmed and commentated on like it's happening live. And
Wow, that's interesting.
I recommend people look into it because there's a lot of wacky controversy about like the safety stuff has gotten really messed up, and people are playing a lot more risky because they're like, this isn't real, so I can like nudge other people's cars,
like crashing into each other.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And it's like causing a lot of problems because
fun.
they're like, how can we take this seriously if we're not going to play it like it's real? It's a whole thing. But yeah, to get back to the prisoner, Six throws the ball really far away and it explodes, and he escapes. And basically the rest of the episode, once he has his mission, is him just like receiving clues and going places. And this happens like over and over. Like I couldn't even take a note on each one because they're so fast.
And just so arbitrary, right? Like,
yes. Yeah.
One thing is like go to the sauna, and then he gets in the bath thing, and then she tries to lock him in with the umbrella. Then he busts out, and then there's a note that's like, go box or whatever, and he goes and boxes, and then it's like, go to the secret town, and he goes, and there's just no rhyme or reason to it. It's just follow this. Okay, now go here. Okay, go here. All right, now I'm trying to kill you. Now I'm chasing you in a car and I'm trying to kill you again. And you're still alive. And now I'm trying to kill you in a sort of trap house.
The word, because you're my trap queen. The word that I kept coming back to in my notes with these was cartoonish. There's the very first
definitely.
one. The very first one is she tells him to go to his favorite bar, and he goes to the bartender whose name is. He's like, Doris, give me the usual, and he like gets a drink. It's like a Guinness, I guess. Probably it's a dark black stout. And as he's drinking it, it says on the bottom of the thing, it says, you have. And he's like, And he drinks faster. And it says just. And he drinks faster. And it says bin. And he finishes the whole drink. And it says poisoned. And the comedic
Hilarious.
timing of that was so good.
Yeah.
Because he's just chugging. And then it says poison. He's like, fuck.
Yeah, and she's like, do you want another one? And he's like, one of those is quite enough or something like that.
Yep. And then he orders like one of everything, and she just like starts giving. He just like throws out like brand names. She's giving him all this alcohol, and again, I talked about this last week. How the prisoner like doesn't have to show us.
Oh, I get it now.
Yeah,
I didn't get that he was doing that to throw up the poison.
right. Well, that's the thing is, so you might be refuting my point here, which is that the show works because it doesn't need to show us him throwing up, but maybe they did need to so that it was more clear that was why he ordered all the drinks.
I missed the part where it said on the glass, "You've been poisoned."
Yeah. So it says that, and then he's like, okay, and he orders everything, goes to the bathroom, and then we cut to after he's thrown up, because again, we don't need to like make Patty McGee fake vomit.
Yeah.
And he's like, much better, and he gets out, and then we're in the sauna, and then the whole thing with the sauna is like hilarious, like a weird. He's in like a spacesuit kind of. It's like a personal sauna, so he just kind of locks himself into a metal container, and she traps him in there, and he gets out. And it says on the side of a thingy, go to Barney's boxing booth front row. Who would be a goldfish? Which I literally don't think means anything.
I think it means nothing, perhaps.
The prisoner has taught me that sometimes a secret message is just a secret message. It's not all themes. And then he goes to this boxing arena, which is I like how run down it was. It looked like a rec center or something with a bunch of rich people cheering on these different boxers, like Killer Kraminski, who number 6 goes on to fight. And this lady taps him on the back and is like, good luck, young man. And she looks like a cartoon Halloween witch. And she's the woman who is Death. I guess that makes more sense that she's wearing black now. And you mentioned that this has nothing on 2009 Sherlock Holmes boxing scene.
Yeah, it wishes it was that scene.
It's very goofy.
Yeah.
I think the like hand-to-hand combat and stuff in this show always looks ridiculous, but I like it a lot. And amongst all the fighting, Kraminski's like, go to the tunnel of love, and it beats the crap out of him and knocks him out. We're just continuing to fly through it. We go to the tunnel of love, nothing's in there. There's like an exploding message. There's a bunch of creepy stuff at an amusement park. She crashes his roller coaster. He's chasing her. There's a guy who threatens him. None of this matters. This is all just nonsense. But there is a part. This is where I actually started to suspect that we were in a fictional world. He's chasing her, and she's like telling him on the microphone, like, you would make a beautiful corpse, which is fun. And then she like spins her hand, and the camera spins with her. And I'm realizing in hindsight how funny it is that I wrote, she twists the camera, and then in my next subnote I wrote, is this episode going to have a twist? Feeling obvious in hindsight, of course it is. It's just kind of like fun camera stuff, I guess, like playing with cinematography. And yeah, he gets to the mysterious town. She says, my name is Death, which I was like, either we're doing the Seventh Seal thing and she's literally death and it's a metaphor, or she's just being weird, which I think is true ultimately. He like stops a fixed gun emplacement. There's a bunch of obstacle course crap. This is the stuff where I was like, this feels like when Star Trek got the animated series and they got to be a lot weirder with like effects and aliens. Yeah. This is like if the prisoner got to be a cartoon, they would do episodes like this.
For sure, definitely.
Where number 6 is just like narrowly escaping bombs and is in a room full of candles, and she's like, all of the wax is nitroglycerin, and if you blow it out, they blow up, and if you leave them, they'll blow up. Awesome. And then she puts on like this is just fully goof world. She's putting on like a military uniform and shooting him with a machine gun. She looks great here. It's a fantastic outfit.
Yeah, the Bismarck helmet's pretty cool.
It's a good touch. And then he ends up in a weird bunker, and then this is where the plot arrives. And basically, there's like a bunch of people dressed as like Napoleon and Napoleonic characters, like French soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
We find out that she's working with her father, and he talks about his wife Josephine. He's like, "We're gonna defeat the British." He six punches a bunch of men who all again act like freaking cartoon characters and are like, "Huh, where's the guy?" And then he like beats them up like he's playing a stealth video game. Like every time someone's like, "Where's the guy? What's that noise?" And he kind of beats them up, takes their outfit.
Yeah, I made the note that this feels more like a video game than it does like a show, this episode.
Right, the amount of guards and goons and like big gun explosions and stuff. Yeah, it's very.
This is a really fun indie spy sort of joke video game.
Yeah, and then your character is just like a silent protagonist who's trying to get through it.
Yeah.
And then when it goes full dumb James Bond with the whole like this dad who sounds like Stewie Griffin. I noted he kind of has that like we must defeat him. I can't even do it properly, but it's just a very like specific type of British that I love.
He's just like Napoleon, and he's like, "We're gonna take over London. I'm gonna call Trafalgar Square Napoleon Square or whatever."
Yeah. And I'll give each of my different men a different
Napoleon or something.
He's like, "Do you like sports?" And one of his guys like, "Yeah." He's like, "Do you want Wimbledon?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "You can have Wimbledon."
It's so dumb.
And Six escapes on a boat, and then the lady and the man try and throw grenades at him, but they're like World War II grenades. So the top doesn't have the explosion in it, the bottom does. And they throw the tops. It's so dumb that they throw the tops at him and they have the bottom and they blow themselves up. Yeah. And he's like, "That was a fun story." And he closes the book, and we realize The Prisoner, I think, is a show that really rewards you for paying attention, even in its weirder episodes, because interspersed between all of these like weird scenes is somebody, presumably number 6, we learn later it is, like flipping through a picture book that like corresponds to all the different scenes. Like there's a tunnel of love shot and a lighthouse and everything. And he closes the book, and there's like a bunch of kids. I've never even seen kids in the village before. But now there's like 5-year-olds, and they're like, "Read me another one, read me another one." Why do they know him? Why are they letting him read to them? Where are their parents? These are not questions worth asking.
And then number 2 is watching, and number 2 is being played by the guy who's the dad, of course, and his assistant is the girl who was deaf, of course. And number 2's all upset that his plan didn't work. What was his plan? That 6 would say, "Okay, I'll tell you a story, kids. I'll tell you the story about the time I resigned," or something. Like, is that what he expected?
So I was a spy for this many years, and here's why. Like, what?
Man. And the woman who's with him is like, "It was worth a try, number 2." Was it?
What did you try?
Work. Yeah. And then it ends with number 6 looking into the camera that they're watching him through and saying, "Good night, children, everywhere," and then leaving.
Because he's a badass. Cool moment. Yeah. Number 6 is cool, is the thing. And I could watch Patty McGoogie like punch his way through a bunch of foreign guards any day of the week. It does really feel like the show has a mandate that every X number of episodes has to have a like big fight scene like that. Because it kind of felt out of not out of character, but just like, what? Like now, okay, it really does feel like, and now is the moment where we start punching men, and we do a bunch of that, and then we go back to having a plot. But it's fun, and I think again that like the stuff that you like, that I like about the vibe of The Prisoner, like the outfits and the music and all that stuff, it's all here. It's just it's couched in a really strange, out of character episode for the series.
Yeah, it just doesn't. It doesn't need to be here. You know, so there are a few. I think there are kind of a few things, a few ways to interpret this or think about like what the purpose of this episode is. So first of all, I want to talk about how I was on the Wikipedia page for the list of Prisoner episodes, and it shows you all the different ways that the episodes have been like ordered by major people or groups or whatever. And one of them was, there was this guy named Scott Appel who was like a TV critic in California, and he, for this like this airing in the 80s of The Prisoner on a PBS station in San Jose, he recorded these intros and outros for every episode where he did like his own analysis of the episodes, and he also did his own ordering of the episodes, and the AV Club reviews actually follow his order of Prisoner episodes. All of the videos are really interesting, and I'm gonna watch more of them and come back with any other insights I get from them. But his for this one is particularly charming because the whole thing is in rhyming verse. Yeah, and there are a few things that I gleaned from that. The first is that he's arguing that or he's saying that maybe part of the reason that they shot this was because they were towards the end of their production order and they couldn't afford to go back to where they had shot the other episodes that were like on the island.
Yeah, they're just filming around the UK instead.
Yes, they had to film around the UK because their budget was thinning out. So that's potentially what's going on here partly. Yeah. He makes the argument that this is a really important palate cleanser between dark and heavy episodes, because the second episode that we're going to be talking about is like completely unnerving and unraveling. And in his order, the one right before this is Hammer into Anvil. So it makes sense that there should be a kind of like breath of air between the two.
I agree with that. It's sort of a right before the final act, like let's do one more fun one.
Yeah. So tonally, I think it makes sense, but it doesn't, because it's a story, it doesn't build the world in any meaningful way. But the part that I sort of missed that I think is important is he says at the end, when they're spying on Patty McGee, number 2 turns off the camera, and then somehow it's number 6 who turns the camera back on to say goodnight to them.
Oh. And so he like knows how to use the cameras.
Yeah, so that indicates that number 6 is gaining more and more control, not only of like the psychology of the village, but of just the workings, the technological workings of it too. And so that's a piece of evidence to say that number 6 is becoming more powerful within this place. And I totally missed that. So I think that's interesting.
He's getting wiser. And at some point, like once you have the ability to like affect that, what is left in terms of like territory we haven't seen? I'm actually rewatching that last part, and there's no evidence that he turned it. It does turn back on. So again, there like is the implication that someone had to turn it back on, and that must have been him. But there's no like you don't see him do it. So I think that's
it's. I think Scott Appel is reading or interpreting that he did it somehow.
Which that's the kind of critical analysis that I like to see. You know.
Yeah, and then him and the AV Club review both basically say like that moment where he says "Goodnight, children everywhere" is the AV Club says it's the final nail in the coffin of the village's plans. 6 was enraged by their interference. He's been unsettled by them, sometimes terrified, always resistant, but now he barely considers them a threat.
Right,
they're dangerous, of course, but so are toddlers if they're holding the wrong kind of scissors. The village has no choice but to play its final card, come good or come ill.
By hook or by crook.
By hook or by crook, right. So that's sort of what drives them to like, okay, now we gotta do the last thing.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
It's very exciting. I always love the moment before the last arc of a TV series where they're like, okay, the plot's here. And you're like, oh man, the plot is here. And that's just very...
yeah, why weren't we doing this before?
Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah. I think we're just really used to shows like steadily building plot to a conclusion. Mm-hmm. And for this whole idea of like, and then the plot arrives is it's hard to square for us. But that's just the way TV used to be. You know, you just tuned in and you were like, what's The Prisoner? Oh, it's about this guy. And like, none of these episodes have to connect. None of them relate. That's why I think like, as we talk more about the conclusion and episode order and like, what's the value of this episode order versus another one? It's partly a consideration of like, could you like be a random person who tunes in to whatever network this is on in your country and be like, oh, The Prisoner's on. I'll watch it with my family, or you watch it over dinner or something. And like get it, or are you going to be like, oh, I didn't watch the previous couple because there was no precedent for that in the 60s, I don't think. Yeah, except like I don't even know how big soap operas were in the 60s, if there were any. That's another interesting thing to think about for research.
Right.
Well, fun stuff, Magellan. Do you have any stray notes about the girl who was deaf before we take it to the close? Take to the half, rather.
Yeah, I do. There are a few fun puns in this one. And I didn't write all of the ones down that I enjoyed, but my favorite comedy moment was when he's tied to the inside of the lighthouse, and Napoleon is saying the sentence, "The lighthouse itself is the rocket," and number 6 finishes the sentence with
"Is
him.
The rocket." Yeah, we know.
Like, oh, cool. This is stupid. And then I really liked when the woman who was deaf is leaving, she says, when the rocket reaches London, you'll be the first to know. Won't that be exciting? And then number 6 says, I'll simply go to pieces. I really thought that was funny. I also liked when the kids are like, will you come read us a story tomorrow? And he says, I'll come tomorrow. I don't think I have any other important appointments. It's like, what am I doing? I'm just living on this island.
Yeah, let me check my Rolodex. I got no one else looking for me in my time.
Yeah. Oh, I also liked when 6 is sneaking around and the one Napoleon guard guy is singing Danny Boy, and then
great scene.
6 knocks him out and then keeps singing the song as he's like putting the dude's clothes on.
There's a sort of momentum to all of that fighting stuff where he's like, because he's trying to also like not make anybody else outside of the room worry. So he's like, I guess kind of partly like, I'll knock this guy out and I'll continue the song so there's no break in the action. Like, I like that the pace of all of that a lot.
Yeah, me too.
It's great stuff, man. Yeah, so I think, again, overall, interesting episode, a lot of fun, but just not what I expected out of The Prisoner. Mm-hmm. And my expectations were further pushed to the brink in our second episode that we watched this week, which we will discuss after this brief musical break. Welcome back to PrisonerChatz. It's still Alan and Magellan. We're still here. We're still talking about The Prisoner. Specifically, we're here to talk about Once Upon a Time, which is episode 16 in our watch order, and it was written and directed by Patrick McGoohan. This episode aired January 25th, 1968, and I'm asking you now, in the audience of my peers, Magellan, what happened in Once Upon a Time?
In this episode, number 2 subjects number 6 to a desperate last-ditch effort to subdue him. Degree absolute. An ordeal that will not end until it breaks one of them. Oh. Alan, what'd you think? Was it good?
Have you ever... What's the angle here, bro? I loved this episode, but it's so much that I kind of like wouldn't recommend. It's like, it's great. It's great. They did Shakespeare. We're moving some plot forward. We got amazing acting. We have, as like a podcastable episode, like the most fascinating trivia of all time, all the stuff. This is an important episode to the series, and it's also nigh incomprehensible on your first viewing. I had to go back and rewatch several scenes to sort of click in the whole structure of this one. But it is really good. Like, between Patty McGee and the actor playing number 2, you just get an acting showcase, and you're watching two people break each other right in half. And, last week you had mentioned towards the end of the episode how fun it would be to have an episode that's just like number 2 and number 6 in a room together. Your suggestion of putting a gun in the middle of them was close, but basically the gun is the ability to leave. And
yeah, and a knife. There's also a knife.
Yes, and otherwise, that's exactly what we got this episode. So I truly, truly enjoyed the hell out of it. What about you?
Yeah, this is it. This is The Prisoner. When you hear that McGowan originally conceived The Prisoner as being whatever it was, only 6 episodes or 7 episodes, and this is one of them. Makes sense. And they produced this one 6th.
Wow.
They produced it way towards the beginning. They produced it right after they made Chimes of Big Ben.
Which is the other episode that features this number 2.
Yeah. And it just goes to show that The Prisoner doesn't need to be that long. There's a lot of stuff that you could cut, and you could probably just watch those episodes that Patrick McGowan originally conceived and have a complete experience of what The Prisoner is, more or less. Maybe some other episodes subbed in there or something. But it directly addresses and deals with these ideas of individualism and, how a person develops as they get older, how they sort of define themselves in contrast with all of the forces that attempt to shape them, what it means to live in a society or not, conform or not. All of those things are addressed here. I think I think that they're addressed in the style of like your friend is in a play.
Yeah, very much so. Yep.
They're like, come see my play.
I want to support my friend, sure.
Yeah, you go to this black box theater and you watch your friend ride around the stage on like a little car, pretending that he's in traffic or something.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff like that in this episode that I think is good, but if you dip out of your suspension of disbelief even an inch, it becomes really dorky the way that like abstract experimental theater can be. So you really have to come to this episode with an open mind, ready for it to be weird and ready to just sort of accept what it throws at you. But if you do, it raises and addresses, I think, the most fundamental questions about the show.
Really, it's an episode where you give a nice boy ice cream and he turns into a 5-year-old, and then you feed him and then he kills you. That's like what it's about.
Yeah, that's it.
But yeah, I agree. And I think it actually goes into the realm of like impressionism with this episode, where it's less about what is happening in front of you and more about like what you feel about what's happening in front of you and what you perceive about it.
So I think I would feel exhausted if we recapped this one.
We simply cannot.
So I'll try to give like a elevator pitch of what happens, and then I think we should just sort of talk about the moments that spoke to us and what we got from them.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it.
So essentially, the episode starts where we see this number 2. He's the number 2 from Chimes of Big Ben. He calls number 6 and he says, "Hey, why do you care?" And number 6 says, "I recognize your voice." And number 2 says, "Yeah, I've been here before. They brought me back. I'm from the Chimes of Big Ben. Remember that?"
Great episode. If you watch it.
Yeah. And it makes sense that they brought this guy back because Chimes of Big Ben was the time where 6 got the closest to telling them why he resigned.
Mm-hmm.
So they were probably like, yeah, Jerry almost did it, so we're going to send Jerry back in there. Which means that they don't kill the number 2s when they fail all the time.
Yeah, probably not. They're just retired.
Yeah, and who knows what that means. So number 2 is watching, he's watching a clip show episode of The Prisoner. He's watching the previously on montage. And he's like, dang, the only way to crack this guy is degree absolute. And what we learn is degree absolute starts with them essentially reducing number 6 to a childlike state, to a sort of infant state, and then taking him to an underground bunker in his jammies with his ice cream, And in that underground bunker, they take him through the phases of life. It seems like to discover what is this dude's deal? Like, where did it happen that he became this rebel guy? And how do we get him to have a fondness for society, for authority? How do we get him to be more of a conformist? So number 2 talks about the 7 stages of man speech from Shakespeare, and then we essentially go through more or less the 7 stages of man. We see 6 as an infant, as a schoolboy, as a teen, young man, middle-aged, and then by the time we get to the end, what ends up happening is that 6 at some point gains the upper hand on number 2, and then actually number 2 is the one who plays out the sort of final stages of man, the old age, and then the second childishness of near death. And eventually, it's sort of established at the beginning, like degree absolute, only one of them can leave. And that's because both of them are so cracked open and raw that one of them is going to sort of assert power over the other. And that ends up being number 6.
Yeah.
And number 2 is unable. He's reduced essentially to a groveling heap, begging number 6 to tell him why he resigned. And then number 2 fails, and there's a voice off screen that says, die, die, die. He dies. And then at the end, a dude comes in. He says, hey, great job, number 6. You won. Congrats. What do you want? Number 6 says, bring me to number 1. And the guy says, cool. All right, let's go.
That's good. And you're like,
that's the end of the episode.
This is the first time I've ever seen an honest to goodness cliffhanger on The Prisoner, and I was so like, all my body was clenched in these last moments.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty straight, that covers it. And that's all we have to say. So there's nothing else to talk about in this episode, and that's
Goodbye.
it. Bye-bye. Yeah, the Shakespeare stuff as a framework I didn't pick up on until probably halfway through the episode, and then I was realizing like, oh, we're doing the stages, we're doing like growing up and all this. One other thing that I like about this episode is that it follows this trend of like, especially in the 60s, like pop psychology and therapy, and the idea that if in order to access somebody's like interiority, you need to like disassemble each major phase of their life and figure out like what went wrong here and like what was your trauma when you were a kid. And in my experience, that's definitely a subsection of like trauma-based therapy that is less popular now because people realize that it's kind of nonsense, and also asking somebody in their middle age to like address the anxieties that they had as an infant is a kind of fruitless endeavor, because you are in a lot of ways a different person than you were. And even with like drugs and like chemical rebalancing, they can't truly get at like what was 6 like as a teenager. There's always going to be this level of like him performing it. And it's just not it's not a good way to like get into someone's head. It can also bring up a lot of trauma that you don't need to. And I like that the show understands that and is like, yeah, this is not like a brilliant tactic, even though it's the last tactic that the Village has. I like the term for it. What was it again? Absolute?
Degree absolute.
Not an invented term, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. Yeah, I looked it up.
I think there are like other terms that sound similar to it, like a decree absolute, as has to do with divorce, I think. But basically, it's just, hey, what happens when we break you down? Well, when we break you down, we realize that you are more complicated, and me, the person doing that to you, also have my own like issues, problems with authority, and misunderstanding of where I fit into the system, which is what I understood to like kind of break number 2, with him going like, I think there's that really crucial line towards the end where he says like, where is number 1? And he says, I'm number 2. And he's like, who are you? And all he can do is identify himself as number 2. Like he just can't think of himself as anything other than his identity, because he has fully embodied it and doesn't have a personality anymore. It's kind of sad.
I'm going to be doing a lot of leaning on the AV Club review and on Scott Appel's analysis to kind of jumpstart us here. And something that the AV Club review really highlights is that part of what's smart about the Village picking this particular number 2 to be the one to try and crack 6 in degree absolute is that number two, this number two in particular, is kind of a similar guy to number six. Like he's also a sort of individual and rebel, but he's like a failed rebel. He's someone who could have been six, or six could be him, but he gave in, right? And it's really interesting if you read closely their exchanges. They get to this point. The AV Club makes the point of like, he's a number two that's smart enough to ask six, not why did you resign, but why do you care? And that being the sort of way to get to him.
Yeah, it's a
And
more
six
useful
really,
question.
yeah, and six really divulges to him more than he's said to anybody else. He tells him like, for peace of mind, because people knew too much. So this number two gains ground, but then they flip it where six can start to tell that I think part of why this number two is so intent on wanting to know is because he wishes that he could be as free as number six is.
Yeah.
And he wants to understand, like, how did you do it? How did you reject all these things that I've been buying into? And six is like, well, why did you accept? Why did you surrender? Why did you do what you did? And that really is what breaks number two down, I think, is seeing someone like six who chose to not become a tool of the establishment or a tool of the system, realizing that he could have done that if he had been stronger or if he had known better. And that ultimately leads to him completely cracking in half and dying as a result.
And it's a stark like moment too when they're in the like young adult or young man phase, and they're like doing boxing, and then we transition to them fencing. And number six has number two on the back leg, and number two is asking him like, try to kill me. Yeah, you are not going to do it, but try to do it. And eventually the tip of the fencing saber falls off, and he totally has the moment where he's like, I could just end this. Like I could just pierce this guy. And he does it. Like he does like strike through number two, but he doesn't kill him. And number two is like, you missed. Like you probably intentionally missed because you still don't have it in you to like conform or to perform violence in the way that like the village is asking of you to. I think that all even ties back into an episode that most people don't like to talk about, which is Living in Harmony. An episode that pushes six to commit violence as much as anyone does. And yeah, there's all this stuff about like, you know, number six is a rebel because it makes sense to him, and that's the way he always lived his life, but he had to have like, was that raised into him, or did he just like sprout from the womb like that? Was he a child raised like that, or was he sort of like just innately like that? I like too that the AV Club review mentions that like you can kind of watch this episode as being about number two, because we actually even start in his office for a while, and we spend most of the early episode following him.
Yeah, it's really his story, I think.
Watching he's the one who gets the most like change and evolution. Yeah.
It's, by the way, it was Scott Appel's video that called him a failed rebel, by the way, not the AV Club review.
Oh, okay.
This is my mistake. Yeah, I definitely felt like, in a way, number six isn't really the protagonist of this episode because he doesn't have an arc. Because he's just been an individual the whole time. I think that is kind of what is confused or not that strong about The Prisoner as a show, is that it's a show about becoming an individual, but its protagonist is like the strongest individual ever, you know?
Already is and always has been an individual, right?
And so he's constantly resistant and defiant and ultimately triumphant in a way where it's like, yeah, okay, where did he fail? We've seen him maybe slip a little bit a couple times, but I don't know that I could really explain his arc or his growth beyond like he gets more self-assured, you know? And so in this episode, he's going from like they hacked his brain and made him a baby to, oh, he grew back up and became the same guy. Whereas number 2 has this whole arc of like believing very strongly that like he doesn't want to be a tool of whoever number 1 is. He feels imprisoned himself, and he sort of wants to rebel against that. But he believes that like you got to grow up sometime and you have to conform to the system. And he takes this whole arc where eventually he sees, oh, that's not the case. And all of the sort of protection and comfort that I thought I got from selling out or from being a part of this society, you know, actually didn't save me in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much like to that supports all of those different reads. I mean, one of the funniest shots, but also one of the, I think, most like symbolically rich shots is right at the beginning. Like before we're even in the bunker, we're in number 2's office, and he's not there, but the rover is like comfortably parked in his chair, which is so. It really gave me like a kind of whiplash you don't get very often in television, because on one hand you're like, oh, that's funny, like the rover is just chilling in his chair, like he stole the chair or something as a character. But then you're like, wait, is the chair designed for the rover? Because it's spherical and it's exactly rover shaped. And it kind of makes you go like,
fits right in.
Was all of this like modernist mod art style like very intentional, and we're just missing like what was the correct usage of all of it? Like that chair is not for people, it's for the rover. Like
yeah, the phone is shaped that way because it fits on the curve of the rover. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's why there's all the different colored phones. And then this episode definitely gave me vibes of a lot of other like late series surrealist television. I know you had mentioned Twin Peaks in your notes, how like...
Yeah, it feels peaksy a little bit.
Like season 2 of Twin Peaks, for people, without any spoilers, of course, like spends a lot of time getting away from its main mystery and just exploring characters and like unrelated side arcs. And then right at the very end, fully becomes about its main story. And
it's like, okay, let's bring Bob back. Let's do the Twin Peaks stuff again.
Yeah, everything's
Forget
here.
about going on a motorcycle journey or whatever. That was just us wasting time.
Yeah.
And now we're going to be Twin Peaks again.
Yeah, and this episode definitely feels like that. It's not surprising to me at all that this is Patrick McGowan's favorite episode. He said in a couple interviews that this was his favorite. Mm-hmm. But also, at the exact same time, he originally wrote this script under a pseudonym because he didn't want to be mocked for the script. He said people would think it was too weird and think it was absurd, which is correct, but that's fine, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, right.
Because I can imagine writing one of these things and being like, there you go, I did it, I made a cohesive whole. Like, you kind of like get so invested in your own narrative and then realize that people have to watch this and you have to film this, and you're like, all right, guys, so bear with me. We're going to start the rover inside of the chair, and then we're going to get 1,000 times weirder from there. And by the end, number 2 is going to be the first dead number 2 on screen. There's going to be blood for the first time. We're going to have number 6 be a baby for half the episode. It's going to be great. Give me money to film this. That fencing scene, I think, is one of, if not the first time we've seen blood. And it's kind of fun to think about, like, again, in comparison to James Bond, that that's a series that went from like occasionally like cartoonish violence to a lot of on-screen violence in the modern era, and The Prisoner has like never really shown explicit violence other than like the rover suffocating people or people drowning or people falling, like no like blood or gore ever. And the very first time we see blood, it's like, oh, and it's number 6 who draws blood. Similar, like last week I was talking about the first time someone brings a gun into a TV show. It makes a big difference. Mm-hmm. And around the sort of like edges of this episode, I think, again, not enough praise can go to the GOAT himself, Angelo Muscat, who I just can't even imagine what they tell him to do on set, where they're like, all right, Angelo, we got you in the usual butler outfit. However, we need you to hold this rattle, and number 6 is going to steal it from you because he's a 1-year-old, and you're going to be fine with that. But then you're going to be blindfolded for the rest of the episode. And when number 6 wins, you work for him now.
That was such an awesome moment. Number 2's so like, saddening. Look, he thinks you're the boss now. Oh man, that was
he great. Thinks you're people.
Yeah.
He's just so he brings this like almost stoic level of like, this is my job. This is all so weird, but this is my job. I can't. Why would I ever say anything?
Yeah, and it drives home that he doesn't work for number two,
No,
right?
he just
He works for the village, and he has this fixed role in the grand scheme of things.
yeah, like the classic any of those like servant roles in series is like, do they work for the house or do they work for the inhabitants of the house? Well, they usually work for the house, so whoever's there is the boss, not the people. It's just
Yeah.
whatever is in the service of the greater good.
Yeah.
A lot of other stuff. I mean, there's just a lot of great lines across the board. Is there any other like big questions that you wanted to crack into in this episode?
There's sort of the like psychoanalysis Jungian read of this episode that I got from Scott Appel that I can dig into.
Yeah, go for it.
And then we can go from there, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So Scott Appel kind of forwards in his video, forwards sort of two psychological ideas here that you can use to think about this episode. The first is the idea of transference and countertransference in psychotherapy, where, and again, like these are concepts where it's maybe they're coming from Jung or something and they're all just BS. I don't know, because I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. But the idea of transference being like a patient can sort of draw on the psychological strengths of their doctor or their caretaker or whoever to be used as a kind of crutch as they rebuild and become healthier. But countertransference is, the opposite, where the weaknesses or whatever the case may be of the patient affect and unravel the doctor. And he's sort of saying that in this episode that, number 2 and number 6, it's an example of countertransference where 6's sort of rebelliousness unravels number 2 as opposed to it going the other way. And then the big thing he also talks about in terms of the hero's journey, how this whole show is a hero's journey thing. And the village is like the place with all the monsters that the hero goes to. And, you can put that structure on it and read that as well. And then in the hero's journey, Scott Appel sort of says like there's a valuable prize to be had in Campbell's hero's journey, but what exactly is 6's prize? I don't know. It's an open question. And then the big Jungian thing here is this process called individuation, where it's the process by which somebody becomes a fully realized individual, basically. And you can read this episode and actually the several episodes in the back half of the season as a process by which 6 is individuating. And he's sort of coming into conflict with all of these different things, these different Jungian concepts along the way. Things like part of individuation is the deconstruction of the persona, which is the social mask that you present to the world. And so that I think we've actually talked in not in those exact terms, but we've addressed how that is an aspect of the prisoner. 6 kind of breaking down his whole gruff guy vibe, and how that can be a kind of unnerving or chaotic experience at first. Confrontation with the shadow, it's like the unconscious parts of your personality. And so, maybe number 2 is his shadow. There's also an archetype of the wise old man, so maybe that's who number 2 is. Who knows? And he even does a Jungian read of the girl who was death, that there's a concept called the anima, and that's like
the spirit,
the feminine qualities of the man, and it has to do with the right. That's what I'm saying. And it has to do with sort of like the relationships that the man forms with women in his life. And so maybe the girl who was death is 6's anima, and he's confronting it and whatever. So there's like this whole Jungian thing that you could do. I don't know what that really adds to the experience of watching the show, except saying like, look, we we did it. We did the Jung thing where he's becoming an individual. But that's at least a lens through which you can view and understand this show as like, there's a process by which you become a fully realized person. But, I don't know if the prisoner is really doing that, because it feels like number 6 is a fully realized person. And then he's just sort of coming into conflict with these things. And I don't see him growing or changing in the way that I would expect someone on a journey like that to grow or change. So that's my issue with the Jungian read.
Well, I think what works so well about The Prisoner is like, as in the scope of this show, what we're able to do is look at the different lenses with which critics can like analyze a work and choose which one makes the most sense to which one we feel the most confident about, and which one we can like convey to the listener and like in an interesting way about. And like I personally don't find the psychological stuff that you're talking about to be my field of expertise, so I can like defer to someone and realize that like, yeah, that's totally a read you can have, and that's great and makes a lot of sense and in some ways connects, but it doesn't feel like the read of the show that fits the way I think about it a lot. For me, like I was saying, a lot of my notes in this one are about the influence of this episode on future television, what this says about like the production cycle of The Prisoner, that like between this and The Girl Who Is Deaf, like, this is not a show that is trying to be one long continuous story. It's a show with a lot of breaks and weird one-off stories, or maybe even like what the performances kind of convey. Because there's some trivia, I think, also about how both Patrick McGowan and Leo McKern, I believe, who plays number 2. And there's a lot of like mixed stuff about this, and we can't speak with that much authority on it, but it seems like they both got like heavily invested in these performances in this episode, to the point where like bordering on psychotic breakdowns, and Leo McKern may have either had a breakdown or a heart attack.
Yeah.
In the filming. And like as soon as you know that, you watch the back half of this episode where he's sweating and like his eyes are like rolling around so much, you like genuinely feel like this guy might just real life pass out any moment.
Yeah.
It's actually very intense.
It's disturbing, yeah, and it definitely detracts from my enjoyment of the episode, I think, knowing that it had that effect on them. Like when you read about how Heath Ledger, when he was playing the Joker, became kind of unstable or whatever, and it's like, well, I don't really want that. I don't want to.
Method acting is a difficult thing. I think it's especially it's super duper common with like men in Hollywood of being like, Christian Bale lost 100 pounds for this role and then gained them all back in the next one. It's like that sort of like playing with your body and your mind that you can do while inhabiting a role may bring a sort of like level of quality of some sort to the role, but is not ultimate. Like you need to accept that you're making a thing that will finish and you will move beyond it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it does really bum me out when I hear that like these people got so into this that they hurt themselves. It's like, no, that's not something I support or whatever. Even though again, it's like such an intense episode, but I think it would work even if they were just performing it. Because you mentioned too, like this is almost an episode that you could have just watched as a play.
It has that quality to it, right?
Like if you set up this whole bunker set and just put all of the placings around and have them move around it and then lay the jail cell out somewhere in a corner, then you can make this whole episode on a stage, I think. But ultimately it's a great exercise in like understanding what the whole show is about, kind of like moving this mystery forward, and also examining like what this episode does to the rest of the series. I think we're gonna have to talk a lot next time about like episode order and stuff, but we know that this episode leads into the next one. It's as much of a cliffhanger as we're ever going to get without a literal to be continued, right?
Right.
So I'm excited to see how The Prisoner wraps up, but at this point, knowing that this is where we're at, I don't expect it to be like number 6 fights number 1 on a rooftop and then like flies away in a helicopter. Like it will not be that. There's 0% chance. It'll probably be way weirder and sad and emotional than that. Yeah.
I mean, I from everything that I have read, Fallout is just insane.
Yes, that's what I love.
It's super crazy.
My last stray note here before we get to the other last couple things is talking about chats. If people have been following around with us for a while, the last season we did Babylon 5, a show heavily inspired, according to its creator, by The Prisoner, to the point where there's an episode in season 2 of that show called Come the Inquisitor, which is ostensibly like a nod to Once Upon a Time. It features a character, Delenn, being interrogated by a man known as the Inquisitor, and kind of breaking her down and asking her to like go down her whole life story and be like, where was the point where you became the way you are and all that. And is even filmed and like cut the way this one is, very rapid, like back and forth, repetitive cuts. It makes me want to go back and rewatch that episode, but as we had been discussing before we got on mic, like Babylon 5 is just one of those shows where like it's either on streaming services or it's not, and you're just like, well, I need to find a consistent way to watch this show. But it's a good show, and if people haven't watched it and they like The Prisoner, I actually recommend you go back and check out at least Come the Inquisitor, and if not the rest of the show. It's a really good work, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's comparing to that scene. I mean, for people who've seen Babylon 5, Come the Inquisitor, it's really like a brainwashing scene. Once you take the entire spoilers for Babylon 5, but once you take the entirety of Babylon 5 into consideration, it's the scene where Delenn and Sheridan are being sort of assessed by an agent of the Vorlons to see if they're fit for the Vorlons' mission. But it's really about like sort of making it clear to them that they need to put everything on the line for the sake of the Vorlons.
Yeah.
And the Vorlons' whole thing is about like conformity. It's the same as what number 2 is saying, really. Like, you live in a society, you have a role, you fulfill your role, and that's what you're supposed to do. So it's putting the two scenes or the two episodes side by side. In Babylon 5, Delenn and Sheridan emerge having said, like, you know what, you're right. That is how it works. And number 6 emerges from this saying, no, screw that, screw you.
Take me to your boss.
Yeah, take me to your boss. Let me see the manager. I'm doing my own thing.
But then Babylon 5 eventually has enough of a scale that it can zoom back around and be like, actually, everyone's wrong. Like, they get to become number 6 event, but it doesn't happen in this episode. It happens like 2 seasons from then.
Right.
Yeah, it's a great comparison or companion piece. I'm actually really glad to have watched these shows in succession because, I talk about Lost comparisons a lot, but B5 definitely pulled a lot of concepts from The Prisoner. I mean, it has like a prisoner or like a interrogation torture scene episode. It has if things named after this is a character who literally does the BCing usually. Like, it's all there. James, the creator of that show, is a huge Prisoner fan, and you love to see it.
Yeah.
Magellan, let's kick this episode into overdrive. What other notes do you have about this wonderful episode of The Prisoner?
Yeah, I've got a bunch. So let's see if I can kind of go through from beginning to end here. So we didn't talk about at the beginning of this episode, 6 is kind of like unhinged with the other villagers, and he's just asking random questions to the people that he runs into, like grabbing people by the scruff of their collars and asking what number they are. And then this one guy is like, don't do that. And 6 says, what? And the guy says, inquire. And then he's like, what number are you? 1, 2, 3, 4,
no, stop,
5,
stop.
6, 7, 8. It reminded me of just the raw energy and power of the scene from Vampire's Kiss when Nicolas Cage does the alphabet.
Thinking of the exact same thing as you were doing it.
A, B, C. It's awesome. Yeah. People should watch that scene if they haven't seen that scene. I haven't seen that movie, but I've seen that scene.
It's busted, dude. It's bussy.
The movie's busted?
Yeah, it's very bussy.
Is he a vampire in that movie?
I can't tell you.
Okay.
But that's a plot point of the movie.
Okay. Is it commentary chatsable or no?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe.
All right. Well, we should get some Cage in the mix.
Yeah, we're surprisingly not. Despite doing the like 90s and aughts, like weird, sometimes bad action movies, we've only done one Nicolas Cage movie so far.
And it was our best film.
True in truth. Wait, was that the one that won?
Yeah, Face Off won our bracket.
Oh my god, come on.
As it deserved to. That's
No,
correct.
we gotta do it again. Shaolin Soccer deserves better. Go on, talk about the prisoner.
So let's see. I was really intrigued by it. Still trying to figure out what the village wants with 6, and the beginning of the episode seems to make clear that what they want is for him to work for them. Information. Yeah. But they don't, again, I think we've said this before, but like they don't want to actually know the information because he tells number 2 again in this episode the answer to the question. And number 2 continues to ask after he's answered the question.
Mm-hmm.
He says, I wanted peace of mind. Obviously, I didn't want to be a spy anymore. And it seems like they want to fully break him because number 2 says at the beginning when he's on the phone with presumably number 1, I'm a good man. I was a good man. But if you get him, he will be better.
Yeah.
And he's just so committed to the authority of the village that he's willing to completely sacrifice himself because he knows that number 6 would be a better number 2 than him. And if the village can crack him and get him, then they can crack anybody.
What I'm saying, speaking of number 2 being really good at number 6 being good at all this, is ultimately if number 1 isn't played by Patrick McGowan, then I'm checking out. I want it to be like the Duplicates episode where he's like, finally number 1, and it's just a mirror, and he's like, it's you, I knew it all along, and then he breaks the mirror and it's Angelo Muscat. Sorry.
It was actually me.
Hello.
Sorry to fool you.
He finally talks. Yeah. What do you think Angelo Muscat sounds like?
I was wondering if it was him
when he was saying kill yourself or die.
Saying, yeah, die. I thought maybe that was his voice.
I think it was implied that it was number 1 or God, maybe. Maybe there's a big.
Yeah, it was 6 at first, I think, and then
Yes.
it sort of morphed and sounded like it was somebody else, and I thought it was Angelo Muscat.
I really that works for me.
It's unclear. There were a couple of moments where I had like laughs or chuckles.
Yep.
One of them was when number 2 asks 6 if he wants to go walkies, and then he gets up with the biggest shit-eating grin in the world, and it's honestly the most scared that I've been in this show.
You want to go walkies? No.
Yeah, and he's like, yeah. I loved the shot where Angelo Muscat is descended into the hole in the floor so he can get to the basement room before them. It's just like this slow, like.
When Mom says it's 30 minutes until dinner, so I go downstairs to play more Xbox.
Yeah. The chalkboard moment where number 2 writes his plan to a almost catatonic number 6.
Yeah.
He says, okay, part A, find the missing link, which, what does that mean? Part B, put it together, which, what does that mean?
What does that mean?
And part C, bang.
Now that I understand. Finally.
Yeah. Now you're talking. Now you're speaking my language. Also, A, B, and C, right? Huh?
Oh, snap.
Maybe that's connected somehow. Or maybe it's not.
The show is impartible, and I love that about it.
And then I had a big laugh at when they're boxing, and he's like speaking to number 6 and putting him in the scenario of the boxing. And he says, what does he say? Oh, he says, you're the champ, boy.
You're the champ.
Yeah.
You're gonna be a
part where
star
6 is
someday.
driving around the little like toy car, and Angelo Muscat is the crossing guard police guy.
Oh,
That
so
was great.
good. The best role play.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a moment there where he like they fight. And he's like, I don't agree with you, and then he like rides away on the scooter, and I was like, that's so. That's like me at 5 years old, being like, Mom, I don't want to put my toys away. I'm gonna go away and go to fairy tale land. Like riding my trike away. There's an iconic Alan photo hung up in my on the fridge in this room, actually, of me riding away on a trike. It's pretty good. Baby Alan. Kind of the number 2 of the Allen household, of my household. Number 6, rather, not number 2. Why do I... You know what's funny is I'm getting them mixed up. It's almost like they're the same in this episode. Huh.
That's pretty trippy.
Yeah.
You're tripping me out.
Okay.
There's a part where they're like, pop, pop, pop. 1, 2, 3, 5, pop, pop, and it's like a really bad improv exercise or something.
They're just whiffing the game the whole time.
And then number 2 says protect other something, and number 6 is like protect other pop, 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 protect other pop. It's so funny.
Even in its most twisted and darkly psychological, The Prisoner still is a very silly show. I like that 6 never says the number. He never says 6 early on in the episode until the very end. He's like number 2 is like, say the even numbers in sequence, and he's like 2, 4. He's like, say it, 6, 8, 10, 6, and then 8. You're 6, and he's like 2, 4. Like it's every fiber of his being doesn't want to say his number. I loved that. That's another perfect, like, it's funny and also relates to the theme of the episode of not wanting to be like identified and stuff.
Yeah. And then another laugh I had was when 6 says I'm hungry, and then number 2 says for what, and 6 says supper.
Look, with a pause too. Like he's gonna say something really wise, and then he just goes supper, and you're like, oh,
yeah.
And the way that they kind of transition between the different phases is just a camera cut. So he'll be a baby in one scene, and then cut, and they'll be like, oh, it's time for dinner. Let's eat dinner together. What did you make today? And now they're young adults together. It's great.
I loved it. Let's see. What else I had? I had some other stuff. I thought it was telling in the boxing or in the fencing, in the fencing part where he goads 6 into killing him with the sword.
Yeah, and
then 6 misses, and 2 says, "You missed, boy. You still can't do it." And 6 says, "I'm sorry." 2 says, "Sorry? You're sorry for everybody. Is that why you resigned?" Which makes me think that maybe the reason he resigned is because he was like told to kill someone and he couldn't do it or something like that.
He felt bad about it. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you really interested? You're not interested in finding out why he resigned, though, are you?
No. I think I'm interested in it in a sort of abstract sense of like what are the values that led him to doing that? Like, I don't think there's an answer like, oh, the Russians bribed him or something or anything like that.
Yeah.
I think this idea of like he became guilty about killing people is an interesting one, and has some weight to it that seems backed up by living in harmony in this episode. So at that level of specificity, I'm interested, but beyond that, I don't think it's a question that has an answer. I think it's a question worth discussing and interpreting and thinking about like, what is it that would cause someone to resist and sort of check out of their role in society? And the answer, I think, is when you sort of feel like you're complacent or complicit in harm that's done to other people.
Intentional or not, right.
It's sort of like the ones who walk away from Omelas kind of thing, right?
Exactly. I'm always referencing the ones who walk away from Omelas. That's a classic.
That's a good story. That's a great one. Mm-hmm. There's this whole thing about how 6, I guess, was a POW captured by the Germans, and then 2 starts speaking German to him.
Yeah.
That was a thing.
I was like looking all over for translations of that. There was nothing though.
Yeah, I don't speak German, so I don't know what they were saying.
German speakers out there, let us know. What'd they say? What's going on? What's he saying? Because that was just real German. It's not like the characters from the other episode where they're just speaking a vague foreign language. They're like he's speaking theoretically translatable German. But yeah, it's good stuff. What else you got, homie? Homie Simpson.
Let's see.
Homie Simpson. Sorry.
Some stuff from the wiki. So we talked about McKern having a heart attack. Mm-hmm. Initially, this was conceived as the first part of or not the first part, but the final episode of a first season of a 2-season show.
Oh.
But then after they renegotiated down to 17 episodes, they sort of refilmed the very end, and it became the first half of the 2-part series finale. So yeah, it's sort of like how Babylon 5 season 4 ends with Sheridan being totally broken in the interrogation episode. Intersections in real time.
There's reads on that show that it could have ended. The creator originally wanted it to end much sooner in another like very sad, tragic episode. Or like they filmed an ending while doing season 4 and then made a whole other season and then used the ending that was filmed a year earlier. We should watch Babylon 5. I feel like
it's a good show. I think it's worth.
It seems chatsing.
Yeah. Let's see. I have some other stuff. The wiki makes a point about how Six's characterization at the beginning of the episode seems weird, that he's so frantic because he's been kind of like self-assured and gaining more confidence over the past few episodes. So I don't really know how to square that.
I disagree with that read because I think that the version of Six that makes the most sense is the one who changes up his like personality all the time just to like keep people on their toes.
Fair. Definitely true.
Like a lot of the shit about continuity on the internet is like, oh, you can watch Six get less and less complacent. And it's like, it actually makes plenty of sense for him to like one day be really used to things and the next day to be fully unhinged. Because that's how people often work. And he's trying to confuse people and not make it seem like he's following any predictable sort of arc. That's my take.
Yeah, he's just kind of trying to throw them off.
Yeah.
And I think that makes more sense.
Yeah.
So I'll go with that. Let's see if there's any more Scott Appel stuff. He just kind of talks about this Jungian stuff. I really think people should watch those Scott Appel videos. They're pretty awesome.
I'll put a link in the description.
Thank you. And then there's this thread in the AV Club review that I'm curious about your thoughts on, where this is the last thing I have, where it seems like McGowan is sort of anti-therapy a little bit because he's using the trappings of therapy as a framework for this episode and then demonstrating Six like overcoming the therapist figure and seeing the therapist figure as a kind of person who conforms you to society. Just like there's a whole, again, like school makes people conform kind of part. So I was wondering what you thought of that. Like, did you feel that from this episode, that it was like kind of anti-therapy?
What I thought is that it's more showing the negative of this type of therapy because both and the negative of like the traditional story trope of the patient like overcomes the therapist. Like both of those are super fraught because it implies that the patient has malicious intent, and the whole therapy thing is like, this is not a effective form of therapy. This like opening up your past and like digging out your wounds and stuff, again, like I said earlier, just leads to more trauma than not. And I sort of think that McGowan and company understood that and wanted to be like, hey, like this is a bad way to assess someone. You should know that, even though people in the 60s might have not all known that. That wasn't as like well understood.
Yeah.
That's my take. And I'm sticking to it.
And then the school thing. I like the line where he said, "I'm a fool, but I'm not a rat." Sort of encapsulates Six's character pretty well, I think. That he's got this foolish devotion to individualism, but there's a kind of pride or honor in it. He even says it's honor. And I think that just tells us more about who he is and what he values and all that. But
pretty dateable dude.
Pretty dateable, yeah. Pretty handsome.
Huh. You bring up some good points here. Maj. Cool. Well, I think we fully disassembled these intimate interactions between a broken man and his real dad, which is it's my alternate title for this episode. It says here in the trivia, this episode was also almost called A Broken Man and His Real True Dad Who Exists.
I think Once Upon a Time is not a good title for this episode.
Yeah. It's a better title for the last one.
Originally, one of the working titles was Degree Absolute, which I think is a much better title.
It's a little on the nose that once he's like, initiate degree absolute, you're like, oh, that's the thing.
Yeah, but it's like, yeah, that is the thing.
But I like that. I like it when
I
it
like
shows
it too.
that.
Yeah.
I'm a fan. They say that GM needs to be a fan of their own players. The podcaster needs to be a fan of their own TV show that they're watching.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Is that true? Cool. Rock and roll. Well, Magellan, we're going to rock and roll next week into the final episode of 1967's The Prisoner. Isn't that exciting?
Yeah, we're barreling forward. We're nearly done with this beautiful little gem of a show. It's nice to do these kind of short shows.
That's what I'm saying, Barbo.
Put them in the bank, put them in the tank, and then they're done.
Dive into the themes, crunch into all the metaphors and stuff, and then throw them in the trash behind us.
Yeah.
The final episode of The Prisoner. I'm gonna. Can I flip the script and read this one?
Okay. Yeah.
Please. The final episode of I want to say like ABC's The Prisoner. Like I want to give it like a longer title. The final episode of The Prisoner is called Fallout. Here's what happens in it. After witnessing the trials of number 2 and number 48 and meeting the president of the assembly, number 6 escapes during the chaos that follows. Oh, fuck. So he's getting off the island.
Cool.
Patrick McGowan had to go into hiding because of the next episode, guys.
That's great.
He could not go into society for a while because people were angry. Whether or not that's because it's so good or because it's I don't know. And you said it's one of the most bonkers episodes ever too. So
everything I've seen, yeah.
And this is timely because we're not only doing that, we're also gonna get a little bit of background info on The Prisoner via a short documentary that is available on Amazon Prime.
So Amazon Prime has a documentary about the making of The Prisoner called In My Mind. It's on Prime Video, just like The Prisoner is, so you can watch both over there. It was made in 2017, and the description is as follows. A feature documentary by award-winning filmmaker Chris Rodley, In My Mind, was made to celebrate the 50th anniversary of enigmatic 1960s TV series The Prisoner. Featuring a series of frank archive interviews with creator Patrick McGowan, new interviews with his daughter Catherine, and never-before-seen archive footage, this is the definitive story of The Prisoner as told by its creator. We're going to watch the finale. We'll watch In My Mind, and then we're going to talk like essential, non-essential episodes, what order we think is the best order, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It should be worth noting that this episode will be releasing on May 17th, and In My Mind will be leaving Amazon Prime on May 21st. So
yeah, you only have a few days to catch that before it's gone.
I can, of course, post on the Twitter, hey, by the end of this, we're going to be watching In My Mind, so check it out if you can. Otherwise, I don't know where else it'll be available. I don't think it's an Amazon exclusive or something, but you should be able to find it otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're finishing The Prisoner. We're going to see what's going to happen to 6. He's going to get off the island, maybe. He's going to be free, maybe. And we're going to find out that it was all a big game show hosted by a guy that happens to look suspiciously just like Patty.
It was all a big birthday present.
Oh, God. 17 episodes of the game would destroy me.
I've been watching Comedy Bang Bang, the TV show, and there's this great gag at the beginning of one of the episodes where Reggie Watts and Scott Aukerman are talking, and Reggie Watts is like, Scott, did you watch the game last night? And then Scott Aukerman's like, yeah, Michael Douglas is so good in that.
Just because I can hear it in Scott Aukerman's perfect delivery.
Yeah, it's really funny.
Is that your chatsum for this week, Magellan?
No, it's not my chatsum, but it gets us into the closing zone of the episode here.
Closing
if I can take us into
zone. One last call for plugs, and now it's time to talk about the emails.
Plugs. Great. So you can get in touch with the show in a number of ways. You can email us, chatspod@gmail.com. You can follow us and message us on Twitter @chatspod. And both of those are spelled CHATZPOD. You can also go ahead and voice your love of the show on iTunes. We appreciate reviews of any stripe. and your feedback on the show. You can support us on Patreon, and we would love for you to do that. Patreon.com/chatspod. You can support at $1, and $1 will get you access to our thanks as well as any bonus things we decide to do on the Patreon. So right now I'm doing a watch of X-Files, a solo watch called the Chats Files, which is available to all patrons, and any other things that we feel like making that. Any other things we feel like making that tier, we'll do in the future. The For Certain content is at $3 a month, where every month we will put out 3 bonus episodes that you will vote on. So we're in May, which means we've done a commentary chats on Sky High. We're piloting Pride and Prejudice. And then at the end of the month, we'll be doing a commentary chats on A Knight's Tale. And then finally, you can support us at $5 just because you love us and because you want to. And maybe some special thanks will come your way in the not so distant future. Who knows? But yeah, that's the plugs.
Wow.
At the end of every episode, we also share a little something, a little snack, a little treat for you to munch on between now and next time. So, Alan, what is your chatsum for this week?
My chatsum for this week is not Alan Twitty, the side character to Shia LaBeouf's character in the kids' Disney television show Even Stevens. But do look up a picture of him because he's a very charming boy, and his kind of look embodies the 2000s, that sort of like style and aesthetic that we love here on Chats. I was just thinking about Even Stevens recently in terms of like kids sitcoms that I really enjoyed, like That's So Raven and Phil from the Future, and that's it. I can't think of another one right now. But those are my chatsum, folks. What is my chatsum is a wonderful little festival that happened over the internet on May 9th, 2020, primarily. I don't know if it still went into the 10th, but it's called Secret Sky, and I know not a lot of people out there are into EDM the way that I am, and I'm like kind of a budding fan, sort of a nubile fan. But Secret Sky is it's a weekend-long music festival being hosted on YouTube. And they've been doing a lot of other stuff like this since quarantine started, because EDM fans need something to do drugs to and also to dance to like realistically. And Secret Sky has just been amazing because not only are they doing like live stuff on YouTube, like performances and unique sets that have never been done before, but also they have a website set up. I don't know what the actual URL is, but it's really easy to Google. Just look up Secret Sky. It's like a visualizer that you can walk around while the sets are going on. So it's not exactly a VR space. I think there is a version of it that you can do in VR, but you can just like pan your mouse around and be like, okay, over there is Porter Robinson like doing a Lil B mashup, and in front of me is like a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds and shapes, and it's really trippy and a really cool use of the medium. And you know, in this time when we're all trying to find some way to connect and like be around other people and experience social gatherings, it's nice to see groups like Secret Sky and other things doing these sort of like get-togethers via the internet. I love it a lot, and I think it's worth checking out. That's
great.
What about you, Megan?
So
I'm calling Megan sometimes. Sorry, I gave him like different names. If that wasn't clear by now, it's a thing I do.
So one of the ideas that we'd had on a couple polls on the Patreon was something that didn't get too many votes, so I just went ahead and did it myself, which is doing a whole watch of the Dana Carvey show and then watching the documentary about the Dana Carvey show that Hulu put out recently called Too Funny to Fail. And it's just it's a really interesting story because the Dana Carvey show is all of these bright, funny minds in comedy who would come to dominate the following decades, basically, creating a show that flopped almost instantly.
Yeah.
And you can kind of follow. It's a really interesting experience to watch the show and be like, this is pretty funny. There's nothing that would make this not fly today. What was the issue? And then to see all of the context in the documentary afterwards about how it was on at 9:30 on ABC, and Dana Carvey is like breastfeeding puppies when people just want him to do church lady. And yeah, it's just this kind of side story in comedy and in sketch TV history that I think is fascinating, and the show's really funny. A lot of it holds up, some of it doesn't. Some of it's pretty bad, but some of it's really sharp and ahead of its time. And I highly recommend doing that experience of watching the Dana Carvey show and then watching the documentary.
And that's all on Hulu?
Yeah, it's all on Hulu. Yeah.
Fabulous. Yeah, I especially the documentary part of that sounds super fascinating from the perspective like we talked about in I think part 2 of this episode of like how do these shows get made and like what determines a show's success or not. Like often it has nothing to do with the quality of the show. It's just like it aired at a bad time, right? We've talked about many a canceled show between this and in one of our Patreon shows, Pilot Chats, about like, wait, this was good. Why didn't people watch this? And it was canceled because it just was broadcast at a shitty time. Like, what are you supposed to do? We've now chatted about it multiple times, but there was a comment on a recent episode of the podcast Fake Doctors, Real Friends, where they were like, one of the things that the network was telling them with Scrubs, it's a podcast hosted by the co-stars of Scrubs, was that show came on like after Friends, and they like the network wanted them to retain like 80-something% of the people who are watching Friends, and they're like, literally no show can do that. That's not fair.
Right, that's just impossible. It's the biggest show ever. So
every time I read about like TV history, especially in the 90s and 2000s, of like how do these shows get made and like what makes one do well or not, it's like everything goes back to Friends, because Friends is just the nucleus of television of the time. It's a truly fascinating phenomenon. So yeah, check that stuff out. And yeah, thank you to everybody for listening. Thank you to Magellan for being the rock to my hard place. And thank you for listening to this episode of Prisoner Chats. Be seeing you.